I said in the first hour that I want to just begin by expressing gratitude for the amount of time and intentionality that goes into preparing a worship service for us on the worship arts team here. There's, I think, more than 100 people involved in that over the course of a couple of months. And so it's just a huge enterprise. And I know I've said some disparaging things about worship in America, which I hold to. I just don't think that those are true of our own team because of the amount of theology and careful thought that goes into that. So that's how I feel anyway. How do you feel? Is that about right? Have I summarized it? Good. The only other part, though, is I'm not sure about the 2 minutes. I'm not sure. I think 2 minutes is a long time for an introvert to wander around the room and meet other people. I tried to work as many as I could, about 1 second each, and I looked around and I saw 1 or 2 of you that spent all 2 minutes with one person. I know you've done it. So what I'd like you to do is stand at the door, and then when the service is over, let everybody go by and you can greet them one at a time. Spend as much time as you like. I want to start this morning with an old Hasidic tale that serves as something like a parable. It goes something like this. When the Baal Shem had an important task to do, he would go to a certain place in the woods, and once there, he would light the fire, and then he would say the prayers. And what he was asked to do was done. There arose after him another generation who, given the same task, would go to that place in the woods, but because they could not light the fire, would only cite the prayers. And what they were tasked with was done. There arose a generation after them, when given the same task, would go to the same place in the woods, and they would say to themselves, we cannot light the fire, we cannot cite the prayers, but we know the place where it all took place. Maybe that will be sufficient. And sufficient it was. The task they were given was done. Then there arose a 4th generation who, when given the same task, said, we do not know the place. We cannot light the fire. We do not know the prayers. But maybe if we just talk about the miracles that happened years ago, it will have the same effect as the other 3. Let he who has ears to hear what is in that parable. I like it because it describes how the power of any religion never leaves all at once. It leaves gradually as each generation holds on to one thing from the past while letting another go. And the one after that, and the one after that, until in the end, there is nothing left to hold on to. I also like it because it describes what happens to multiple generations when they live in exile. It describes, I think, what was happening to the generations in Ezra and Nehemiah's day. When carried into exile, they went for 70 years, 3 generations, each one holding on to something from the past while letting another thing go, until in the end, there was almost nothing left to hold on to. Now, if you've listened or remember from what I said in the past, there were at least 3 groups that were involved in exile. One were those that never left Israel, even in exile. They stayed home and they worshiped in the ruins of a temple that used to be glorious. Two were those who were carried into exile because they were the best, the strongest, the brightest, the most wealthy. And Babylon wanted their resources. And so they went into Babylon and they assimilated. They became successful in law, economics, education, even government and business. But in the process, they found other gods. Then there were those who grew up in Babylon. They never saw the temple, never read the Torah or the law of God. They don't remember anything of the miracles that the first group is talking about or were. And today, I want to spend the balance of my time speaking to people in the first group and those in the third group, because I think you have a lot in common. You may not know each other. You're several generations apart. You may not, in some cases, even like each other. You may strongly disagree with each other, but you both have this in common. You are hungry for a genuine encounter with God, and you'll do virtually anything to have one. And because that's true, you share the same threat, the threat of pursuing something that isn't God after all. Are you there? Yes? I know it's second hour and you're sleepy. Are you still with me? Let's look at the first group. These are people that are morally conservative. They raise their children to be conservative. They follow all of the festivals and holy days, most of the traditions, and they pray for what they call revival, though they're never quite sure what exactly that means. They don't agree, but they're praying for it. I think what they mean is, God, bring us back to the days that were before. Bring us back to the place and the time when you were felt among us. And that is a beautiful prayer. And I hope they never stop praying that. That's mostly my generation, because we do remember miracles. We have heard of revivals. People coming off the street that weren't even in the service, down the middle aisle to kneel at an altar in order to find Christ. There were extraordinary things happening in those days. So I hope we never stop praying for this. The trouble with it is that it doesn't resonate with people in the third group who grew up in Babylon, because they don't remember anything of it. And so whenever the first group talks about this, it seems to them to just be like tales from a really long time ago. These people truly do desire God. They are spiritual. They're just not religious. And the religion that they've deconstructed or are is largely the religion of those who grew up or those who made it well in Babylon. This generation of people do not believe in the Babylonian dream. They see a gap. But God has stirred their hearts. And so they genuinely want something of God. They just don't know what it is. Now, the trouble with exile is that the glory or the presence of God, which we said last week is found first in the altar, is taken away. we lose it. This is why in many religious circles today, the altar is not even in the room. Because for some, it isn't an altar, it's a table. And so you bring it out only when you serve communion. But then when communion's over, you move it again and you go back to worship. But I'm always left wondering, if there is no altar, what are you worshiping? And how do you know? And what actually sanctifies this space? I know you think I'm kind of going nerdy on you right now. Is that okay? What keeps the temple from becoming profane? The word profane simply means in front of the temple. Comes from two words, pro, in front of or before, and phanos, meaning temple. And so something is profane not when it's sacrilegious or dirty or blasphemous. It's anything that is done in front of or outside of the temple. And so life is divided into that which is sacred, that which is done in the temple, and that which is profane, or what you'd call secular, that which is done outside of the temple. Are you tracking? So if all of a sudden the altar is gone, then what do we have as a place where God meets us? And I'm not suggesting we idolize the altar. I'm simply suggesting we treat it for what it is. It's a portal. We look through, not at. Not at. You look through it in order to serve and see the God on the other side. And an altar is built for the one it worships. Are you still with me? So this is a huge part of restoring the temple. It starts with an altar. The ancients felt about altars the way Christians feel about churches. You can't save a soul without one, and you can't raise a city without one. So they built the altar 20 years before they built all this. That is remarkable. But in exile, that's taken away. The longing for God, however, is not. Even when the presence of God is gone, the heart is still hungry for God. And so we look for him anywhere. In exile, the problem is not that we worship nothing. It's that we worship everything, because we are trying to find some supernatural being that is in control of the world. And if we can't, we invent them. So the greatest threat in exile, the threat that both the first group and the third group must deal with, is the threat of idolatry. And when I say it, you're going to recoil. You're going to no, wait a second, man. You're talking about primitive third world countries where people bow down to animals and stones. But in reality, an altar is anything within creation that we inflate and give more importance to than it really has. An idol is anything we look to bring meaning and coherence and legitimacy. Anything we look to give us power, control, or superiority has the potential to be an idol. So an idol can be an object, a person, an idea, a hope, a pleasure, a ritual, a feeling. It's anything we turn to again and again to bring meaning, happiness, safety to our lives. An idol is not something we look for, it's something that finds us when we're looking for something else. So it's anything we turn to and trust to bring happiness. Anything we say, if I could just have that, then I will be happy. It's anything we turn to when the chips are down and we don't know where to go. We turn to idols, call them that or not. It's anything we sacrifice other things to get because it's at the top of the pyramid. It's anything we wait for because it's always worth it when it comes. I hope by now are you tracking? Are you starting to see that idols are things that stick to you? Not because you look for them, but because they are hidden in the creases of every society. And to live in a society for a period of time makes us vulnerable to those societies' idols. And as David Foster Wallace pointed out, not a believer, by the way, not even close to a believer, by the way, in his now really historic speech called "This is Water." He spoke it for commencement at Kenyon College. You can Google it, you should. It'll take you about 5 minutes to read it. He says, in the adult world, there isn't such a thing as atheism. It's never a matter of if you're going to worship. It's always a matter of what you're going to worship. And he says, one of the compelling reasons to worship a supreme being is because virtually everything else in your life will eat you alive if you worship it. His words, if you make money or things your idol, you will always feel like you don't have enough, like a little more. If you make beauty or sexual allure your idol, you will always feel ugly. And as you age and it starts to show, you will die 1,000 deaths before they finally bury you. If you make intelligence or being seen as smart your idol, you will always feel dumb, like an imposter, like they're gonna find you out. If you make power your idol, you will always feel like you don't have enough. And so you'll need more power over more people to legitimize your existence. He isn't wrong, is he? Is he? It is a powerful indictment on not only society, but on religious people in particular. So when the people of God returned to rebuild the temple, they started with the altar. And when they started worshiping on the altar, they started with what God has revealed through Moses in the law. They didn't invent their own religion. They didn't ask themselves what's convenient or comfortable. They started with the thing God called for in the law of Moses. They followed it with the artifacts, silver and gold from the first temple. They took those artifacts and they built them into the practice of worship in the new temple at the new altar. And then they started offering sacrifices. And of all the sacrifices Israel has, the sacrifices they offered were those in which the worshiper receives nothing. Israel had sacrifices where you received something, you took it away, but they had sacrifices where you received nothing. It was all burned and went up in smoke, and those were the ones that they offered, which is remarkable. They were not first concerned with what the worship was going to do for them, but whether it was worthy of God. And while they were building, the prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, they came seemingly out of nowhere, and they started to encourage the people. Haggai was more like a stick. He kept saying things like, you should give careful thought to what you're doing. Said it 4 times, kind of negative. Zechariah was more like a carrot. He kept saying, you can do this and God will be with you. So between the 2 prophets, one a stick, the other a carrot, one always saying, be careful, and another one saying, you can do this, you can do this. The people built the temple. They called on visions from the prophets. Listen to this, for what worship would look like in the new temple. So this week, it occurred to me that all of the prophets but 3 preached before this temple was built. And they all spoke eloquently about what this temple was going to look like and what worship was going to do. I think what's happened in America is we've taken these prophecies from like Isaiah, Micah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, these prophecies about a new temple, and we've moved them to the end of time like there's some future prophecy, like they had nothing to do with the one they were building. And when we do this, we render these passages innocuous. They mean virtually nothing. But if you move them back, and you say to yourself, wait a minute, this is the kind of worship they were describing. This is what they expected this temple to do. Your mind virtually explodes with a vision of a brand new kind of worship. Listen to this. Micah says, when this temple is finished, it will be the most important place on earth. Isaiah says, and the nations will stream into it, and they'll come not because they have to, but because they want to. And they will say, teach us the ways of God so that we can obey him. They'll have a strong bias toward obedience. They won't just gather and hear talk. They will say, how do we do this? Jeremiah says, yeah, and when they gather, they will have a brand new heart and a brand new spirit, for God will give them a new heart and a spirit, and they will do by nature things God asks them to do. They won't be saying, oh, that's hard. They will do it willingly, aggressively. Ezekiel says not only that, but it will be like a river that flows out of that church. The further it gets away from the church, the deeper it is, the faster it's moving, the richer the waters, so that the power of that church will not just be in the gathering, it will be in the sending. The best part of the church will be when they're not gathered, but when they're sent out there. That's where the stories will come. That's what people will be talking about. Micah says, and when they come, they will bring peace. They will cause warring nations to beat swords into plowshares. And these temples, this worship, will be a source of peace, not polarization. Isaiah says, and when they come, even those on the margins will have a place. Those that are lame, those that are blind, they'll have a home, they'll have a place to stand in the worship of the new temple. I don't need to milk this. Let me just ask, if you stand that vision of the prophets' worship next to the worship in many American churches today, do you see worship in our country being the most important place on earth? Do you see it as a place where the nations stream into, or is it still the most segregated place in the world? And do you see them coming with a hunger and an appetite to be taught the ways of God? Or do you see them coming mostly to wait for the service to end? And do they come with new hearts and new spirits? Do these worshipers do naturally the things that God called them to do? And when these churches, when they gather for worship, is it a source of peace or is it a source of polarization? And do the people on the margins really find a home and a place to stand in those churches? I'm asking. Every one of these things, American scholars have labeled prophecy and moved it recklessly to the end of time. But that is not how Hebrews read the Bible. They didn't expect this for the end of time. They expected this in the middle of time, and they expected it from the temple these people were building. Now you can see why this became such an important subject to me. Because what you worship, you become. And so what you've already become is the surest evidence of what you've worshiped. Know it or not. What is the way out? The way back? The way back for me this week was Malachi. I read Malachi. Man, was he negative. And my mother told me to stay positive, so I'm going to finish the message by staying positive. Well, that old boy was negative. When I started reading the sermons of Malachi, what I discovered is that he is the only prophet who preached after they built the temple. That's it. He is the only prophet with the advantage of hindsight. He preached about 60 years after the temple was built. And watch this. What he was speaking to was mostly people in the third group. And what he said to them was, even though you don't know the people in group one or even like the people in group one, you are becoming the people in group one with your own traditions, self-invented rituals, and calling it God. I read the prophecies, the sermons of Malachi, and I came away with 4 questions. I want to just list those to you because I think these are questions you can take with you this week as you go to your altars. I know some of you have made altars in your offices. You've made them in your homes, your businesses, maybe schools, locker rooms. You found a place where you can meet with God quietly and mostly privately. And I want to give you something to structure that time that you spend with God this week. And I just felt the safest way to do that was to bring the teachings of Malachi in the form of questions. There are 4. Here's the first. What am I bringing to God at the altar? What did it cost me? What do I do for love? The prophet said, you keep bringing me blind and lame animals. You bring me things that don't cost you anything. You bring stuff that was left over. When you were done with it, then you brought what was left. And he says, you lit useless fires. I won't listen until you bring something that is expensive, something that disrupts you, something inconvenient. Bring that. And I'm ready. Question 2. What has God asked for that I still haven't done? I can't do. How obedient to God am I in the hidden places of my life? The prophet says, you've built your reputations, but you've ignored the commands of the covenant in the hidden places of your life. Watch your mannerisms, your humility, your sense of reverence, a spirit of contriteness. Bring that with you and stay quiet and listen more than you talk. And I will speak. You can hear me. Question 3. What have I promised other people in my life? How faithful have I been to the claims of those relationships upon me? Am I acting in the best interest of others? The prophet says, you have made vows with people I told you to avoid, and you've broken vows with people I gave you. You've let yourself out. You've told yourself it was hard, it wasn't worth it. You walked away and you made them here with all that is within you. Honor the promises that you make, and I will meet you there with strength for every day. And 4. How do I handle the silence of God? Am I patient with God, or have I drifted toward faster, easier idols? And when I come to this altar, am I honest with God, or do I try to present the person I think he wants to see? How genuine, authentic am I? The prophet says, you followed because it was always in your best interest. And now that the times are hard and I seem unfair, it's no longer in your best interest. Do you still have the nerve to follow? Are you patient? Can you wait? Am I still your God? I think the appropriate way to end is for us to call ourselves around these 4 questions. I'm going to come off of the platform. I'm going to leave the platform open. I'm going to leave the front part open. This isn't everybody, but man, I believe it's somebody. I think there are idols that have snuck into our life. We didn't name them this, and we maybe don't have the nerve, but they're there, and we know exactly what they are. Man, before you go, I wish you would bring them up here and lay them there in front of him. And maybe there are vows that you've made, and maybe there are things that are hidden in your life. Maybe it's just the sense that it's been too easy for you lately, and you need a religion that is more demanding and inconvenient. Maybe you'll come forward and you'll either kneel here, you'll stand up by this altar up here. Some this morning, they knelt around the altar up here. Maybe that's what you'll do.